Okay, let's get started. We are about to dive deep into a case that really, it just perfectly shows the kind of relentless, almost obsessive persistence you need to solve a cold case.
Hmm.
It's a disappearance that lingered for nearly 2 decades,
Yeah.
just haunting this small German village. And this isn't, just some dry historical account.
Not at all.
We're really going to look at how patience, and this is the key part, patience combined with a huge leap in data management and digital forensics, finally brought closure.
Yeah, closer to a family who waited 19 agonizing years for justice.
We're talking about the disappearance and murder of 8-year-old Johanna in 1999.
And this investigation, it really provides an incredibly moving and vital case study for law enforcement agencies everywhere. I mean, when an investigation goes cold, the challenges just multiply.
Right, everything works against you.
Everything. Physical evidence degrades, the trail cools, memories fade, and maybe most critically, the sheer volume of analog paperwork can become so massive that the information itself just becomes unusable.
It's like it's lost in plain sight.
Exactly. What makes the Johanna case so remarkable is how the German investigators managed to keep the file active, and then how they leveraged modern technology, specifically the systematic digitization of mountains of old documents, to find that crucial buried thread they had missed for almost 2 decades.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to follow that full 19-year chronology. We want to understand how those initial small details gathered way back in 1999.
Details that seem like total dead ends at the time.
Exactly. How they became the absolute linchpin for the entire case nearly 2 decades later. It's a powerful lesson in, investigative faith, in bureaucratic determination, and just meticulously preserving every single piece of forensic evidence.
It is. This deep dive will clearly show that sometimes the most effective tool in solving a long-dormant crime isn't a new witness or a sudden confession.
Yeah.
It's the ability to search a database compiled from 168 physical binders of old paper. That transformation of paper into accessible data is really the hero of the story.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Let's go back to September 1999. And the geography here, the setting, is so key to understanding the profound shock that just ripped through this community.
It really is.
Johanna lived with her family in a place called Bobenhausen. It's in the Hessian Wetterauch. And you have to picture this place. It is not some sprawling suburb. It's a tiny, tightly knit village. We're talking only about 500 residents.
Wow, 500.
Yeah.
And that's a critical point because the family had actually moved there about 10 years earlier from Frankfurt, this huge, busy city. They were specifically looking for that quieter, safer, more rural life.
The exact opposite of a big city.
Precisely. In a community of 500 people, the prevailing belief is one of complete security. It was still perfectly normal for kids to play outside alone, far from the constant supervision you'd need in a city.
And it's that sense of safety, that inviolable trust that the perpetrator exploited. It's why the crime was so deeply destabilizing for everyone there. The incident itself happened as 2 weeks after Johanna's 8th birthday. She was in her 3rd year of primary school. And on the afternoon of Thursday, September 2nd, 1999, she did what was totally normal for her. She headed out on her bicycle.
Right, and her father spoke to her just before she left. She was riding towards the local sports field, which was situated right near the edge of the woods, maybe a few hundred meters outside the village itself.
Not far at all.
Not far at all. The interaction was brief, and she made a specific promise. I'll be back by 7:00 p.m. And this established her character right away for the police. She was a reliable child, she followed rules, she wasn't the kind of kid who would just wander off or ignore a deadline.
And that 7:00 p.m. deadline, when it arrived, became the absolute point of crisis. When 7 o'clock came and went, and no Johanna, the alarm bells were almost instantaneous.
Her older sister, who was home from university on a break, was sent out to look for her along that short route she would have taken.
And that is when the first, most terrifying piece of physical evidence was found.
The bicycle. The sister found it. It was just resting near a small bank by a bridge right near the sports field. And for the father, the sight of that abandoned bicycle made the situation instantly, horrifyingly clear.
He knew.
He knew. Johanna loved that bike. She would never, under any circumstances, have just left it there. That discovery shifted everything. It went immediately from a simple missing persons case to a high-priority suspected crime.
The response from law enforcement and the community was, as you'd expect, massive and immediate. You had the police, the fire department, local volunteers. They launched these huge search efforts, public appeals, everything.
But based on the bike and Johanna's established reliability, the police quickly escalated their formal assessment. They suspected a serious crime was committed and formed a dedicated specialized investigation team, what's known in Germany as a Sonderkommission, or SOKO.
So they created a SOKO right away. That shows how seriously they were taking it from minute one.
It does. It shows they understood the perpetrator had to have acted incredibly fast, probably spontaneously, overwhelming an 8-year-old in a very short span of time. And given the location, just outside this quiet little village, it immediately raised the possibility that the perpetrator was someone local, someone familiar with the area.
So that immediate escalation meant investigators were looking for any scrap of information they could find. And that initial phase of the SOKO led them very quickly to a critical piece of testimony.
Right, a witness who placed a highly suspicious vehicle at the crime scene around the time Johanna was last seen alone.
Okay, so who was this witness?
This is where the investigation really hinges on the observation of a man named Mr. Y. He was one of the football players using the sports field that afternoon. And his testimony was invaluable, not just because of what he saw, but because of how he saw it.
What do you mean?
Well, he saw a car driving extremely slowly near a nearby town, and then he saw the same vehicle again, parked weirdly near the sports field. It was on a grassy patch right next to the road, very close to that little bridge where Johanna's bike was found.
And the timing of this. This must have been a very tight window.
Incredibly tight. And Johanna's friends had left her alone at the bank around 5:00 p.m. Mr. Y saw this suspicious vehicle between 5:20 p.m. and 5:25 p.m. That means the entire abduction, the approach, subduing her, getting her in the car, and escaping had to have happened in a 25-minute window maximum.
Well, that speaks to either enormous luck or just extreme opportunistic speed from the perpetrator.
Exactly.
You mentioned the specificity of his observation. What gave his testimony so much weight with the investigators?
His job. Mr. Y wasn't just some casual observer. He was a trained car mechanic.
All right.
So he's someone who habitually notices vehicles, their condition, their model, their behavior. He was able to give a detailed, almost technical description of the car, even though he only briefly saw the driver, who he said was a man, through the side window.
So, based on the mechanic's expert eye, what was the description? What were they looking for?
He identified it as a specific model, a VW Jetta, the second series, known in Germany as the Swipe Barret. The color was noted as being light, possibly silver or white, but that part was a little more ambiguous. The most critical, verifiable detail was the license plate prefix, HG.
HG, which stands for
Bad Homburg. But he didn't know the rest of the numbers and letters.
Still, even with that specificity, a Jetta, Bad Homburg plates, the administrative challenge in 1999 must have been just staggering. I mean, we need to remember this was before the comprehensive, instantly searchable digital databases we have today.
It was a monumental old-school undertaking, a total nightmare. Investigators were able to identify 600 Jetta owners with bad Homburg license plates in their system.
600.
600. And the SOKO knew a small team couldn't handle that. So they brought in specialized riot police units, the Bereitschaftspolizei, specifically to undertake the task of physically checking all 600 vehicles and interviewing the owners one by one.
That is pure, relentless, shoe leather detective work. Just going door to door, trying to match one of 600 cars against a single person's memory.
Exactly. And this massive effort is precisely how they initially came across the man who would eventually be convicted, Michael Kornacher.
So they found him right at the beginning.
They did. Investigators visited Kornacher as part of that initial wave of checks. His Jetta was one of the 600 they needed to verify. However, and this is the crucial part, the witness, Mr. Y, was brought to look at the car. He immediately dismissed it.
Wait. If the witness was a mechanic, trained to observe vehicles, why did the SOKO just dismiss the lead based on his memory of the color? Did they even check if Kornacher might have, repainted the car recently?
That's an excellent critical point, and it's really the tragic flaw of that initial investigation. The witness felt very certain about the color mismatch. He told investigators, "That was not the car I saw. I can rule out the color."
And they just took his word for it.
They took the mechanic's word as expert certainty. In hindsight, the difference between a slightly faded silver or a white Jetta and a subjective memory of just light could be tiny, but at that moment, his statement was decisive.
And on top of that, Kornacher provided what seemed like a solid alibi for that 25-minute window.
He did, which just further solidified their decision to dismiss him. He claimed that afternoon he'd been in a minor fender bender in a nearby village. He said the damage was tiny, like 69 Deutschmarks, and he settled it right there with the other driver.
Okay.
On top of that, he claimed his girlfriend was visiting him that evening, which served as a secondary, potentially verifiable alibi for the time right after the crime.
So between the car color mismatch and the seemingly solid alibi, Kornatcher was just written off.
Completely. The entire Jetta lead, despite that massive effort, appeared to lead to a frustrating and tragic dead end.
It's incredible. They had the right car type, the right area, and the right person in their sights. But a subjective detail, the color, and an alibi they didn't fully verify allowed them to slip through their fingers for almost 2 decades.
And the focus had to shift. That initial high-intensity effort failed. So they were forced to move away from the 600 Jetta owners and back to the agonizing search for Johanna herself.
For 7 long, heartbreaking months, the case just went cold. The public appeals continued, the searches continued, but Johanna was still missing. Then, 7 months after she disappeared, in April of 2000, tragedy was compounded.
Yeah. Hikers stumbled upon her skeletal remains.
The discovery was made on April 1st, 2000, in a remote patch of forest near a town called Alsfeld. And to give you a sense of the distance, Alsfeld is about 90 kilometers away from Bobenhausen.
And that's a really significant distance. It immediately suggested the perpetrator was mobile and had specifically chosen a remote area far from his home base to get rid of the body.
It suggests a degree of calculation. Maybe not for the abduction itself, but definitely for what came after.
For the disposal, yes. A lot of calculation.
And the condition of the remains. It tells a really grim story about how hurried and, frankly, how careless the perpetrator was.
Absolutely. The remains weren't buried at all. They were just deposited directly on the forest floor. And that immediate exposure to the elements meant that by the time she was found, there had been extensive scavenging by animals.
So there wasn't much left for forensics to work with.
Very little. Only the skull and individual skeletal bones were left, along with her clothing, the Mickey Mouse t-shirt and jeans she was wearing. Any soft tissue evidence, which would have held most of the DNA, was severely compromised or just lost entirely.
But amid all that degradation, investigators found a few pieces of non-biological evidence that would turn out to be infinitely more valuable than any compromised biological sample.
Yes. The KTI, the German forensic specialists, found 3 specific items. First, a rope, which they figured was used as a restraint. Second, some human hair. And third, and this is the most critical piece, a length of adhesive tape packing tape, piquette Klebeband.
And the initial forensic work focused intensely on what that tape was used for.
It did. The theory was grisly. The specialists believed the killer had used the tape to wrap Johanna's head, most likely to silence her or subdue her completely. And then, during decomposition and animal scavenging, the tape had detached and been dragged away, but it took potential trace evidence with it.
So the tape became the primary physical evidence carrier.
Exactly. The primary spur and trigger for the entire case.
The challenges of examining that tape after 7 months in a wet forest, I can't even imagine. What critical evidence did they actually manage to secure from it?
Well, the tape itself was remarkably long, 15 meters.
15 meters, wow.
Yeah. The examination required incredible precision because they had to meticulously separate the sticky surfaces without contaminating or destroying anything. And despite all the degradation, they secured 2 key physical traces that they cataloged and preserved perfectly.
And what were they?
First, fibers, tiny textile traces found stuck to the tape. And second, a partial fingerprint. They identified it as trace spur 11, also found on the tape.
So they have 2 solid pieces of physical evidence fibers and a partial print that somehow survived the elements. But back in 2000, when they ran them through their databases, they got nothing.
Exactly. The initial database searches for DNA were negative, and the partial fingerprint produced no match. But this is the key insight for you listening. The investigators had the incredible foresight, or maybe just stubborn professionalism, to preserve these physical traces.
They bet on the future.
They bet on the future. They knew they were technologically useless right then, but they had these 2 tangible microscopic proofs, the fibers and the partial print, that, if preserved perfectly, represented a unique physical handshake with the perpetrator. They were just waiting for a time when technology or a new lead could finally make that connection. It's really an act of faith.
So the case then settled into that crushing reality of a cold file. Years passed without any breakthrough. But the commitment from the investigators didn't just vanish. They would occasionally try these psychological tactics to keep pressure on the killer.
One of the most aggressive and visible tactics happened in 2009, 10 years after Johanna disappeared. Investigators put up a huge billboard with her picture right at the entrance to Bobenhausen.
Was the main goal just to get new public tips, even a decade later?
Only partly. The real effort was psychological. By putting that large, constant reminder at the town entrance, they were forcing the perpetrator, or anyone who knew something, to confront the reality of their crime every single time they drove past. It was a cold-blooded tactic designed to make the perpetrator uncomfortable, maybe trigger a moment of weakness.
Then the file changed hands in 2014, which is often a critical moment in a cold case review. A new investigator took over this massive collection of documents. What was his first move?
He took the most fundamental step possible. He went to the original abduction site, he went to the bike path near the sports field to get a personal, visceral feel for the crime. That's so essential for a cold case investigator. You have to step away from the paperwork and analyze the physical geography.
And what did that on-site analysis suggest about the perpetrator that maybe the original team had missed?
Well, the physical environment suggested that the abduction was incredibly risky from the killer's point of view. It was a bike path near a public road. A cyclist or a pedestrian could have passed by at any moment and seen the whole thing.
So it suggested something about the killer's mindset.
Right. It led the investigators to refine their hypothesis. The perpetrator was likely either highly familiar with the area local, or Ortskundig, or the act was completely opportunistic and spontaneous, relying on just sheer luck.
A sudden opportunistic crime committed by someone just driving through. That brings us right back to the Jetta owner they dismissed years ago.
Precisely. The location strongly suggested that the killer was driving along the main road, saw Johanna alone and vulnerable, spontaneously turned his car around, drove down that short 165-meter bike path, and quickly overwhelmed her. And this new theory about spontaneity and local knowledge reinforced the absolute need to scrutinize every single person who had ever been peripherally connected to that crime scene, which leads directly to the core problem they face.
The information overload. Despite that renewed focus in 2014, the case was still stuck for 2 more years. And the real fundamental breakthrough didn't come from a new lead or a new witness. It came from an unprecedented administrative revolution.
That information overload was the single greatest obstacle to justice. By 2016, the case file comprised a mind-boggling 168 physical binders. These enormous paper files, the Bandakten, contained countless protocols, thousands of reports, transcripts, photos, and most crucially, handwritten notes from initial interviews and site visits that were just buried deep within the paper copies.
The problem wasn't a lack of information. It was that the information was completely inaccessible.
Absolutely. The documents existed across different computer systems, paper copies stapled together, filed chronologically, but they weren't digitally interconnected or searchable. Think about it. If a witness mentioned a specific address on page 40 of Binder 3, and a different officer filed a report about a minor offense at that same address on page 100 of Binder 140, no investigator could ever manually connect those two dots.
And the handwritten notes were basically lost forever.
They were effectively lost. You couldn't index them, you couldn't search them.
So the new investigative team decided on a strategy that sounds radical, incredibly costly, and just monumentally labor-intensive.
A complete digital transformation of the entire analog file.
Wow.
It was a monumental commitment, which the investigators themselves called the Sisyphus task. They undertook the meticulous process of complete digitization and optical character recognition, or OCR. This was a brutal physical job. It took a team 10 to 12 weeks of non-stop work.
Doing what?
Removing hundreds of thousands of staples, meticulously scanning every single page, and ensuring the OCR system could accurately read not just typed documents, but also all those handwritten notes that had been considered lost.
What were the bureaucratic hurdles? I mean, proposing such an enormous, expensive project for a 17-year-old cold case must have faced some resistance.
Oh, there's always resistance, especially around cost and resources. Police departments are set up to handle active cases, not engage in, historical archiving projects. The SACO had to argue persuasively that the potential for cross-referencing buried data was worth the huge investment. They framed it as forensic archaeology digging for digital treasure hidden in plain sight.
And this is the aha moment for anyone trying to understand modern cold case work. Why did this tedious administrative process matter more than any new tip at the time?
Because it made the data instantly researchable, recherchefähig. Once the data was digitized and OCR processed, investigators could enter specific search terms, names, addresses, vehicle types, and the computer would instantly find correlations that were humanly impossible to spot manually. They moved from a system of filing to a system of relational searching.
And it worked.
It worked.
The digital analysis led them right back to the name that had been dismissed 17 years prior.
The name that repeatedly surfaced in unexpected and sometimes tangential places, cross-referenced across multiple documents, was Michael Cornacher, the same man who was one of the 600 Jetta owners back in 1999, the one whose car had been dismissed because the witness thought the color was wrong and whose alibi was considered good enough. The new digital file, connecting all these minor historical offenses and suspicious activities, exposed him as a person of intense interest.
And the reemergence of his name in those digitized files coincided almost perfectly with a new, highly suspicious incident near Bobenhausen.
Yeah, that incident finally gave the police the legal leverage they needed to get a search warrant. It was an extremely bizarre and timely event that provided all the momentum they needed.
What happened?
Around this time, a local forester caught Cornacher in a very alarming situation with a 14-year-old girl not far from the original crime scene. Cornacher tried to play it down, claiming it was all agreed upon, but the forester was suspicious. He noted Cornacher's name and vehicle and immediately reported it to the police.
And the investigative link to Johanna's case would have been immediate and just chilling for the Soko.
Absolutely. Two things immediately drew parallels. First, the victim was a near child, which reinforced this consistent, long-term pattern of predatory interest in young victims. And second, and this is the direct physical link, the incident reportedly involved adhesive tape.
The tape.
The tape. The presence of tape and a suspicious encounter with a young girl near the original abduction site, coupled with his newly revealed digital paper trail. It made him the primary, unignorable suspect.
So this incident finally allowed the police to get the critical legal tool they needed. A search warrant? A Durchsuchungsbeschluss.
The moment they secured that warrant, the whole scope of the investigation just exploded. They recognized the complexity of what was needed, so a new, larger Soko with 30 dedicated officers was established in Gießen. Their directive was singular: focus exclusively on Michael Cornacher and build an irrefutable case.
Let's delve deeper into his profile then. What did this new Soko discover about Cornacher's history during this intensive investigation?
His profile was deeply disturbing and consistent. He was born in 1976 and adopted. He had a seemingly high intellectual capacity. He studied biochemistry but dropped out despite getting good grades. And crucially, he was unemployed, living off unexplained means, which suggests he had huge amounts of unstructured time.
And his living conditions.
Also very telling. His apartment, which he'd had for 20 years, was described as being in a state of severe neglect, a verwahrlosen Zustand. He was a severe hoarder, a sammler, which meant his apartment contained decades of accumulated junk.
Perfect for storing overlooked evidence.
Absolutely. And his past police records showed this deeply worrying long-term pattern concerning young girls that even predated Johanna's case.
Like red.
Well, in 1993, when he was 17, he attacked an 8-year-old girl with long blonde hair, eerily similar to Johanna. That attack was fortunately stopped by 2 passing cyclists. Just 2 years later, in 1995, he was convicted of sexual abuse of an 11-year-old girl in a public swimming pool.
So this establishes a clear history of predatory behavior, targeting girls in the same age range, with the same physical appearance as Johanna.
Yes. The Johanna abduction was not a one-off crime. It was the tragic culmination of a long-established behavioral pattern.
So, on February 15th, 2017, police execute the search warrant on his cluttered apartment. What specific evidence did they find?
The search yielded critical physical and digital evidence. In the attic, they found a plastic box containing various ropes, and most importantly, adhesive tape. The hoarding was vital here. He never threw anything away.
And his computers.
They secured all of his data storage devices. The digital analysis was damning. They found a significant cache of child pornography and films Cornacher had secretly recorded of young girls on their way to school. It showed this continuous, voyeuristic, predatory obsession. And it was also confirmed he was frequently searching the internet for information specifically about the Johanna Bonnecker cold case.
So he was obsessed with his own hidden crime.
A morbid obsession, yes.
The physical and digital evidence created this overwhelming profile, but the Soko needed that definitive, undeniable link to the 1999 crime scene evidence, the fibers and the partial fingerprint.
This is where the KTI, the forensic team, comes back in. They had to compare the items from his hoarder apartment against those 2 tiny traces they'd preserved for 17 years.
And what did they focus on?
They knew exactly what to prioritize. They focused on items that looked historical. Specifically, they found this blue plastic box that Cornatcher had kept, which contained items that looked like they'd been stored in a vehicle for a long time, maybe even that old Jetta. And inside this car box was a crumpled up ball of adhesive tape, a Kleeblanknel.
And they knew tape is an outstanding evidence carrier.
An incredible evidence carrier. It retains forensic material really well, even over decades.
And what they found in that crumpled tape, it provided the first of two irrefutable smoking guns.
It was a sensational moment of scientific validation. Forensic analysis of the tape from Cornacker's car box revealed the exact same microscopic fibers that had been found on the adhesive tape wrapped around Johanna's head at the burial site 17 years earlier.
A perfect match.
A perfect match. The scientific certainty of a double independent match across two pieces of evidence found 90 kilometers apart, preserved over nearly 2 decades, is virtually conclusive. It directly placed Cornatcher in contact with the murder weapon.
They're the fiber match. Now, for the fingerprint, that partial print, Spur 11, that was impossible to match back in 2000. How do they finally connect it?
This just perfectly illustrates how evolving technology is solving cold cases. The problem in 2000 was that police prints were ink and roll. They captured the central parts of the fingers. The partial print on the tape was likely an edge or a side of the thumb.
A part they wouldn't normally capture.
Right. But in 2016, Cornacker had provided new digital fingerprints during a registration process. And these new digital scanners, they captured the entire topography of the hand, including the fine detail of the edges.
So the technology just got better at reading the parts of the print the old methods missed.
Precisely. The BKA, the Federal Criminal Police Office, was able to use this enhanced digital image to produce an expert opinion matching that partial print, Spur 11, with the outer side of Cornatcher's left thumb, a scientific geometric match.
So within a few months of intense focus, they went from circumstantial suspicion based on old paper files to having two absolute forensic connections.
His fibers on the tape and his thumbprint on the tape.
The case was solved. Over 18 years after the crime, on October 25, 2017, Michael Cornatcher was finally arrested. And during the interrogation, the investigators chose a very specific, deliberate tactic.
They adopted a highly professional clinical strategy of calm and respect. They deliberately set aside their own emotional response to this horrific crime. They knew that when a suspect is faced with irrefutable forensic evidence, they often confess, but they'll always try to minimize their legal blame.
They just wanted him to talk.
Their primary goal was to elicit any statement at all.
Initially, Cornatcher employed the expected tactic, just denying everything, calling the fiber and print evidence a huge mistake.
Right.
But then he broke.
After asking for a short break to use the toilet, he came back and shifted his entire defense strategy. He confessed to the abduction and death of Johanna, but immediately insisted her death was an accident, an unfall.
A clear, legal calculation. He's trying to get the charge down to manslaughter or accidental death, anything but premeditated murder.
Exactly.
What were the details of his self-serving narrative about this accident?
He admitted to driving his Jetta near the sports field, specifically looking for a girl for sexual purposes, confirming the opportunistic nature of the crime. He saw Johanna, spontaneously grabbed her, subdued her with chloroform or ether, and put her in the trunk of his car.
And he confessed to stopping multiple times.
Yes, he confessed to stopping 3 separate times because she woke up, was kicking the trunk lid, and screaming. He claimed that during these stops he had to hit her schlagen to force her to keep her trap shut. His words. And he claimed he stopped a final time to check on her and just found her dead. He then drove the 90 kilometers to the forest and deposited her body. But the critical part of his lie, his attempt to prove he lacked malicious intent, it all revolved around the adhesive tape.
What did he claim about the tape?
He insisted he was extremely careful not to wrap the 15 meters of tape around her nose so she could still breathe, thereby suggesting he never intended to kill her.
Cornatcher's claim that he was careful to leave her nose free to breathe was the final, flimsy defense the prosecution had to dismantle to get a murder conviction.
And they had to prove that his actions constituted premeditated murder, or at the very least, a willing acceptance of her death. And they used the physical evidence itself, that 15 meters of tape, to scientifically and dramatically refute his story.
How did they do that?
This part is arguably the most powerful illustration of forensic science just triumphing over criminal deception. Investigators conducted detailed physical experiments using the exact same type of commercially available packing tape Cornatcher had used. They analyzed its properties, its width, its stickiness. They also calculated that 15 meters is 3 times the length of a standard roll.
So walk us through the conclusion of that experiment. Why was 15 meters impossible to use non-lethally?
They concluded it was physically, practically, and mechanically impossible to wrap 15 meters of stiff, sticky packing tape around the small head of an 8-year-old girl while meticulously ensuring her nose remained free.
The tape is just too rigid.
It's too rigid, it's extremely sticky. Wrapping that staggering amount of material multiple times would inevitably create a cocoon that sealed off her airway, regardless of how careful he claimed to be, and the amount of force required would have been immense.
So that forensic reconstruction was the final piece of evidence proving malice.
It was the legal game changer. It proved that Kornacher either intended to kill Johanna, which is the definition of murder, Mord, under German law, or, at the very least, willingly accepted her death, billigend in Kauf genommen, by taking actions, hitting her and wrapping her head in tape that he knew carried a high risk of fatal suffocation.
His calculated claim of an accident was just completely dismantled by the physical properties of the tape itself.
The power of the accumulated circumstantial case, the Beweisgebild, was overwhelming. You had the matching fibers, the matching fingerprint, his disturbing history, the evidence from his apartment, and the partial confession, which was then refuted by science.
And it all led to a definitive outcome in court.
More than 19 years after the crime, the court convicted Michael Kornacher of murder, attempted sexual coercion, and possession of child pornography.
He was sentenced to life imprisonment. But the court went a significant step further by establishing the particular severity of the guilt. We should explain that legal distinction. What does besonders schwer der Schuld actually mean in the German judicial context?
Establishing the particular severity of the guilt is a critical legal designation. It means the court determined that the crime had dimensions like exceptional cruelty, premeditation, or maliciousness that elevate it beyond an average murder case. Legally, this designation severely restricts a perpetrator's parole eligibility.
So it ensures he serves far longer.
It ensures the killer serves far longer than the standard 15 years before even being considered for release. It recognizes the immense evil and calculated nature of the act. It's a powerful statement of condemnation from the justice system.
And this verdict, 19 years in the making, must have been a profoundly emotional and validating moment for the Soko team.
Oh, an immense relief. It validated 2 decades of persistent, often frustrating work. It confirmed that critical strategic decision to undertake that massive digital transformation. And perhaps most importantly, it confirmed that the decades-long meticulous preservation of those tiny fragments, the fibers and the fingerprint, was not an exercise in futility. It was an investment in ultimate justice.
This whole narrative arc, stretching from the analog world of 1999 paper files to the advanced digital and molecular forensics of 2017, is just a true lesson in investigative persistence. I mean, think about the scope of the effort. The riot police physically checking 600 Jettas, the investigators returning to that isolated crime scene years later, and that team painstakingly scanning 168 binders. That level of commitment should be the benchmark for cold cases everywhere.
It really highlights the absolute importance of modern data management in police work. When those fibers and that partial fingerprint were secure in 2000, they were technically useless. They yielded no match. But because they were meticulously preserved, they became the ultimate forensic key years later.
Right.
The willingness to invest months of intense labor and institutional resources into that digital Sisyphus task, making the unsearchable searchable, that is defining how long dormant crimes are being solved today. The knowledge was always within the paper. It just needed the technology to unlock the connections.
And what's truly fascinating to me is that the initial dismissal of Michael Kornacher was based on subjective human evidence, the witness's memory of the car's color. The final, irrefutable conviction was based entirely on objective, microscopic, scientific certainty, the fibers and the thumbprint that confirmed what the original investigators had missed. It's the triumph of hard science over human error.
And it sets a new standard for cold case evidence preservation. Every single piece of physical evidence, no matter how small, has to be maintained indefinitely because as technology evolves, whether it's fingerprint resolution or new methods of fiber analysis, that seemingly useless evidence today could be the key to conviction a decade from now.
Michael Kornacher not only took Johanna's life, he destroyed the life of her entire family. Now, after 19 years of investigation and a final clear verdict of murder with the establishment of particular severity of guilt, the question isn't whether justice was finally found, but whether the methods, the digital task, and the decades of evidence preservation have fundamentally changed the ethical responsibility police now bear for every single cold case file they possess. That certainty, that commitment to never giving up, is the new standard we have to demand.